Hello and welcome to this program on Golfe TV Africa. Today we are receiving for you a special guest, Dr. Peter Baofu. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, sir.
Dr. Peter Baofu is an American visionary and author of 137 new theories of fictions in 171 books as of June 2021 to provide a visionary challenge to conventional wisdom in all fields of knowledge, that is the social sciences, the formal sciences, the natural sciences, and the humanity, with the aim for unified theories of all the fields of knowledge and also numerous visions of future history in relation to the mind, nature, society, and culture. For instance, two theories of his concern post-capitalism and post-democracy, about why capitalism and democracy will not survive and will be replaced by what he calls post-capitalism and post-democracy in future civilization. I think this is fair if we know that the African continent is a continent where, many of these superpowers get resources, they get a lot of advantages, and Africa is, kind of where they get all their resources, the resources that are contributing to the development. Do you think it is fair for Africa to be treated this way by these Western powers if they have so much advantage on the continent?
Well, this is a question people have been asking, not just in Africa, but also in many other continents. To understand the international order that we have now, you have to understand European colonial era, European colonialism starting, let's say, in the modern times, starting, let's say, with the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, they colonized, let's say, especially in Latin America. And then you have the French Empire, the British Empire, and some other European empires. They were doing the same. The Russian Empire too, the Dutch, the British, the American. So you have to understand that history. It's not that it happened last night. It's have been going on for the last few hundred years. And slavery in Africa is a good example. Enslavement, the slave trade, for example. But on the other side, I spoke about this in my publication, and one of the book is called Beyond the World of Titans and the Remaking of World Order, in which I predicted that China and India will become the dominant superpowers by the end of the century. In fact, China is already doing that now. And the US and the EU will become less and less dominant. So things are changing. But again, it's a question of power. Look, you talk about this, I think that's a very good question to ask. China and the US right now are also competing in Africa.
We'll address that, but first, speaking of power, don't you think that Africa has what it takes to be a superpower of the world? Don't you think that?
Look, Africa, as I said in previous interviews, Africa is very rich.
Yes.
Africa is not poor at all.
At all.
I mean, in terms of resources, Africa has some of the most natural resources endowment in the entire world.
Yes.
Not even China and the US can compare. They cannot even compare with the resources, the natural resources, and that's why the Europeans were not stupid. They colonized you because they knew that you had a lot of things to give them, and you also have tremendous cheap labor. That's why they enslave you, because it's cheap for them to enslave you. They bought you as a slave, and then you work for them for free. They only feed you and put you in a plantation plant, whatever that might be. It's a question of power again. So resources, you are not poor at all. You are one of the most, the richest continents.
Do you think
problem is that is the cost for that. The problem is that even though you are very rich in terms of resources, you have not been able to exploit the resources for your own gain. In fact, in Africa is a good example. Even before the rise of the Europeans, even before the Europeans came, Africa was already very poor at that time, and also not very advanced, even at that time. So that is one of the most central questions that Africans have to ask and have to resolve. How are you going to take all the resources that you have and try to develop and empower yourself? And that requires a lot of national strategies. Unfortunately, they do not exist yet.
And Professor, don't you think that unity of Africa can do something about it?
Yes, I do think that unity is, of course, very important. But again, there's also wishful thinking too in a certain way, because it's nice to talk about unity. Look at the EU. The EU, is there unity at the EU? Well, there's also, that's important, but Africa has a long history of ethnic conflicts. In fact, one of the major problems for slavery in Africa, the Europeans enslavement of Africans several hundred years ago, was because of the infighting among different tribes in Africa. And they enslaved each other. And the prisoner of war in many of those wars and stripes and all that, they were taken as slaves. And later, and they sold the slave to each other. And then when the European came, then all of a sudden they want to make something out of it, and they sold the slave to the Europeans instead of selling the slave to the local, the opposite tribes, wherever they might be.
And upon leaving, the Europeans, the colonizers, I want to call them, they left some more division, they left language barrier, they left artificial frontiers and everywhere, and that complicated the whole thing.
Well, yes and no. Look at Singapore. You know Singapore in Southeast Asia.
Yes.
The British colonized Singapore, by the way. Now, Singapore right now has a higher income per capita than the British. They are even richer than the British. Think about it. Now look at Hong Kong. You know Hong Kong?
Yes, Hong Kong.
Now, the British also colonized Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
But right now Hong Kong has a higher income per capita than the British. They are even richer than the British. They do it. So instead of blaming sometimes, you don't see the other side. I think that it's more important for Africans to stop blaming and look into yourself and see what you can do. Learn, let's say, from the Singaporeans. By the way, many people in Singapore are Chinese. The people in Hong Kong are also Chinese. So the Chinese has a different history. They learn from it. They say, okay, we made some mistakes. Something happened. The Europeans came to colonize us, but we can learn from it, and we can be better than they are. And they did. Now, Hong Kong and Singapore are two of the most important financial centers in the world. And of course, London and New York are also very important too. They are probably even more important. But the point is, they make it. They transform themselves. Instead of spending all day and talking about blaming on the other side, but you're not learning from your own problems. So it's time. The same problem in America too, by the way, is the same problem about slavery in America. And it's the same problem.
Professor, you were talking earlier about China and the United States, and by the way, both superpowers have a rivalry on the African continent. What do you think that rivalry is all about?
Well, it's the same question as the previous question, but in a different way. The U.S. does not want to give up power. The U.S. want to continue to dominate as the dominant superpower, and that's why under Biden and also under Trump, they talk in a very aggressive way. They do not want to cooperate with China that much. Why? Because they consider China as a threat to their own domination. Just as the UK considered Germany as a threat in the 1930s. Why? Because Germany at that time did not want to back down. Germany was at that time was also very angry with all the conditions in Europe at that time. They rose up. So it is the same problem over here, that there would be a rivalry between the two. That's very natural because the U.S. does not want to give up. Western powers, just like in your previous question, or any power, doesn't want to give up power. They also want to be in control and dominate. So if you have a new guy, the new guy has to compete with this one. So now the rivalry is in Africa. Resources is certainly one of the most important. They want now, but remember, the old era is over. Right now, China come here is not coming to enslave you like the European colonialists.
It's a win-win.
Buy and sell. In fact,
win-win relationship.
Yes, and they build roads, bridges, stadiums, hospitals, school, and all that, sometimes for free.
Definitely.
And the Europeans did not do that as a colonizer. So,
Yeah.
so in this relationship, you buy and sell. You give them the resources, they pay you. The problem is, what happened to all those money that you take from them? How come you cannot take all those money that you earn and develop? Well, there are a lot of answers for that. Look at Nigeria is a good example. Nigeria is one of the most important oil producers, but because of corruption at all walks of life, and because of civil conflicts, because of incompetent government system, and there are many other problems. So now all those money disappear in all this kind of pockets. But the money is not that much used for the local people. And Nigeria is one of the highest population in the world, by the way. So you see that. So it's not because they colonize you, but because you do not use the money that you earn. Look at Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Bahrain. The same question is that they produce a lot of oil, they have a lot of resources. But Dubai, for example, is able to use the money and develop themselves to be one of the major centers in the Middle East, Dubai, for example. But how about Bahrain or Kuwait, for example? Well, you can ask the same question in Africa. What happened to all those money that you take from them in selling all these resources? And then at the end of the day, you want to blame them for the fact that next time you go to the supermarket, you buy something, you pay them, you get something back, right? Yeah, you get something back. And they earn something from you too, right? But then they use the money to reinvest, to make the supermarket larger, to be more successful. How come you cannot behave like that?
It is true that corruption is a problem in Africa, but sometimes these Western powers, these Asian powers, when they come and negotiate our resources, they pay them very cheap. They ship very cheap and then transform, and now the products that come out of these resources are sold to the continent and at a higher cost.
Yes.
And that cannot be of an advantage to the continent.
By the way, it's not just true here. Even in the US, you have a big company. They come to a local village. They negotiate with the local people. They try to open up a big supermarket, a big company, the multinational corporations. Now, the local guys also do not have much negotiation power. So you do not want it, okay, we go to the other town. But if you need the jobs, if you need the investment. So when you are a small guy, you negotiate with the big guy. The big guy often have the power over you. It's like when I fight with you, if you are a big guy, the chance that you win, I lose. It's right. I'm not saying that it's good thing or bad thing. I'm just trying to answer your question. Why does that happen? Why is there a tendency? Yeah, again, it's power.
Yeah, and I have to say that the African youth in general have come to understand that our problem in Africa is not just the Western world, but we have the problem of leadership. And we have been working on it. We have been putting pressure on our leaders, especially concerning the CFA francs, issue and that. And we hope that this will put a change on the continent. Coming to the end of this interview. Thank you, dear viewers, for having us. This is the end of this show. We'll see you later. Thank you for watching.